Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to be taking a look at Ordinary Grace, pages 25 through 87. For 2023, this is presentation number 2. I'm going to keep doing the normal character conflict connection theme. I talked about context. We're going to talk about verisimilitude. We're going to discuss, to some degree or another, the direct and indirect characterization. And we're going to pick up on the idea of the dichotomy, the idea of the paradoxes that are inherent within phrases like ordinary grace and that are the core of this novel. One of the other terms I think we need to pick up is the Bildungsroman. As the slide tells you, it's a coming of age novel in which the character leaves the state of innocence and through experience or experiences takes a step towards adulthood, maturity, or wisdom. We are going to juxtapose the terms innocence and experience throughout this presentation and use those terms as kind of the core of this presentation. Innocence. Plot details at the very beginning of the novel having the frosty root beer in front of the drugstore. Back in the day, a lot of drugstores had a little lunch counter, and people could get a quick burger or some sort of sandwich. And a lot of times they would mix the drinks at the drugstore. In other words, the syrup for a Coke would be there, and they would mix the syrup for the Coke with sparkling water, stir it up, and it would be mixed right there. It wouldn't be bottled. The carbonation and everything would happen right in front of you. Same with the root beer, same with the basic sodas. Playing catch in the front yard. All of that is part of the idea of innocence. Those are simple, innocent acts that hopefully all kids at some point or another have experienced. Also, I think there's a sense of nostalgia that goes with this. All of you are too young to remember the idea of black and white televisions. And certainly Walt Disney Television and Walt Disney Presents every Sunday night is something that I remember. But again, it's not part of your experience. However, in class, there will be a YouTube, I'll play the YouTube link I've got up here. The link is down below, and it just plays the intro. And Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, in my world, was black and white. I didn't have a color television until the 1980s, to the best of my memory. And so in the 1960s, it was all black and white. The mention of Ed Sullivan was another Sunday night staple. It was a program that featured a bunch of variety acts. It was a program that gained infamy for showing Elvis only above the waist. It was the program that introduced the Beatles to the United States. So there's a lot of nostalgia by the mention of Ed Sullivan, by the mention of Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. And I think for a certain reader, it sucks them back to the time when they were young, people like me. For you, I hope that it just reminds you that this is a hearkening back to an innocent time. Black and white television, Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, which showed movies in 3 or 4 parts or spread over the month, showed all of Disney's stuff from the 40s or 50s spread over the month. And Ed Sullivan, all the humor was sanitized and extremely clean. So there's nostalgia combined with innocence here that I think is an important element of this novel as well. But the novel does bring us into experience. Gus and Doyle are day drinking in the back of the drugstore. That's an act of experience. I don't think there's anything qualifying innocence with day drinking. The confrontation with the homeless, hobos, bums, whatever you want to call them, they were homeless. Encountering the dead man, you've got remembrance of the war, and you've got post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, none of those things will make you think about innocence. Lying certainly is not an act of innocence, and domestic abuse certainly is not an act of innocence. So, all the while, this novel is making us hearken back to a wonderful, simpler time. It's reminding us that those times were never simple. That everything that we run into now, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, uh, homelessness, uh, post-traumatic stress disorder, domestic abuse, all of those things were happening in a supposedly more innocent time. And so you have these two things, innocence and experience, butting heads and tying the novel together. And we have them within characters. We have her described as a pretty girl, and yet she had a cleft lip, and the scar is still visible. She's described as the joy of her mother Ruth's heart, but it's also the fact that the mother had unfulfilled longings, things that she never got to complete, and she is living vicariously through her daughter. There's a lot of experience there, failed experience as well. Ariel's taking track of the small successes, but she's also giving them warnings about don't get caught and reminding them that there are going to be lots of places they're not supposed to be. And within that, there's a lack of innocence, and that lack of innocence is a reminder that they shouldn't get caught. And Ariel acts like a mom. She illustrates the experience. You'll have plenty of time to become responsible. And believe me, it's not all it's cracked up to be. I think part of reading is being curious. So, why does she make this statement? What's the reason behind it? What has she experienced in the way of responsibility? And how does she know responsibility is not all it's cracked up to be? Being curious, where are we going with this section of the novel? Then in the description of the place. If you take a minute, I'm just going to ask you to read the thing as I blather on here for a second. But certainly this is almost every small town in Minnesota at the time. It's a lot of the small towns in the Dakotas still. You've got the grain elevators. There is a stark beauty. The trains rolling by. And today you have this sense of emptiness. The rails are empty. The elevators are deserted. And to break off, rows beside the tracks, they're tall, they're white. White is always innocence. But they're on the flats, which is the poor part of town, the part of town where there's a ton of experience. Beauty being stark means that it's not a complete beauty. In fact, it's sculptures made of bones, which once again is an idea of death, of decay, and all that's left is the bone. Hopper cars being filled, but today they're empty and deserted. Even within the descriptions, you have innocence, tall and white, and you have experience, sculptures made of bones. We also have a sentence that I think does a lot of work. They had a strong congregation that included a number of Protestants of different denominations who had no church of their own near enough to attend easily and preferred the more informal service of the Methodists to the religious rigor of the Lutherans, who were as ubiquitous in Minnesota as ragweed. First of all, remember that this is a Methodist pastor's son who perhaps feels outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by the number of Lutherans around him. And I think the fact that there were tons of Scandinavians in Minnesota, that Minnesota has a strong Scandinavian heritage, and historically Lutheranism was very, part of the Scandinavian culture. This part, I think, makes a lot of accurate things. The verisimilitude is pretty strong with that statement. But we also get his point of view where he's perhaps feeling outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. But even within church, the idea that we're supposed to have innocence in church has a dichotomy of some experience. Strong congregation, all good folks. But they wanted an easy kind of religion. They had no church of their own near enough to attend easily. The informal service of the Methodists versus the religious rigor of the Lutherans. And if it's a strong congregation, why and how did a strong congregation develop out of people who did not wanted the easy way out and attended that congregation rather than the Baptists or the whatever other denomination they couldn't get to church in? On page 44, we have this buildup of suspense. And I've talked several times about this idea of you get to make evaluations. This is foreshadowing. I mean, straight up, the next would be the most painful to bear. And if you've gone further in the novel, you know what the next is. The question I have, and the question you should be answering as you're reading, is this too heavy-handed? Is this taking a club when a scalpel might be a better way to do things? It's just a question, and it's a thing I want people to look at as you go through this novel. I think it's an excellent novel. I think it might be close to a great novel. It doesn't mean that it's perfect. And it doesn't mean that there aren't things that we should look at and say, perhaps Kruger just went a little too far here, or perhaps in other instances, he didn't go far enough. Working on characterization now. Ruth indirectly lets us know that she's not happy in her marriage. She didn't sign on for this. And she goes after Nathan for praying, and there's a bit of sarcasm, in this idea of thank you for trying. So we started getting a feeling from Ruth and what kind of character she is by how she acts, what she says. And remember, characterization is direct, and direct characterization involves what a character says, what a character does, and how a character reacts. And if I said direct a second ago, I apologize, it's indirect. Nathan, we get some direct things. He's the son of a seaman, which indicates that he's probably not very well off. He's the first drum to go to college. In the 1950s, that would have been a huge deal. He plans to be an attorney. He's whip smart and cocksure. Those are direct statements. And he was something of a catch, according to Ruth's sorority sisters. And then we've got the statement that the war changed Nathan Drum, changed him dramatically, and completely altered his plans. The beginning of this discussion of PTSD, Those sorts of things, I think, are an important element of Nathan, both direct, almost all of these are direct, although indirect, we can see why Ruth was attracted to him. She wasn't attracted to the preacher. She was attracted to the lawyer who was going to be a great catch. She was attracted to the smart man who was going to be a great catch. She was attracted to the overly confident man who was going to be a great catch. We've got a lot of layers in chapter 8. We have the mystery. Warren is Danny's uncle. He has Bobby's glasses. Why? We have more social divisions, the grandfather's wealth versus living on the flats. We have some family divisions, Ruth versus Liz, Warren versus his family. We have some family counseling going on. We have some characters, Gus versus Doyle. And we have the fact that Nathan, who is seemingly oblivious to some things, is more aware of what's going on than Frank and readers may have believed. The fact that the war changed him dramatically, it didn't make him less observant. It didn't make him less intelligent. I think that's an important thing to remember. This should wrap it up. I hope that everyone has a good day. Hope to see you all in class next class period. And I hope that this was helpful in looking at how this novel is coming together.